Welcome, willing workers, to our lesson for Sunday, June 26, 2022. This year is just flying by. Our lesson today is going to be titled Divided, and this is the lesson that God had judged Solomon for Solomon's unfaithfulness to him, and this is the beginning of that judgment. We take our lesson today from 1 Kings chapter 12. We're going to look at verses 6 to 19 today. The theme of our lesson is this: failure to listen to wise counsel contributes to conflict. Let's go to God's Word and see what occurred here after Solomon's death. In verse 6 we read, "Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while Solomon was yet alive, saying, 'How do you advise me to answer these people?' said Rehoboam. They said to him, 'If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them, and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever.' But Rehoboam abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with Rehoboam and stood before him. And he said to them, 'What do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us?' And the young men who had grown up with Rehoboam said to him, 'Thus shall you speak to this people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions.' So Jeroboam, the leader of the people in the northern tribes, and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had said, 'Come to me again the third day.' And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, 'My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions.' So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word to Solomon, which the Lord spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. And when all Israel saw that the king, Rehoboam, did not listen to them, the people answered the king, 'What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David.' So Israel went to their tents. But Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. And King Rehoboam hurried to mount his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day." All of us have probably received some kind of advice in the past that we, at some time in the future, wish that we had heeded that advice. We may not have understood it at the time we got the advice. Inexperience, young age are all factors in that. Many other factors come into play in whether you heed somebody's advice to you. But I'm sure there are some that can recall advice that you had gotten at an earlier age that now, at this age, you wish you had heeded. And this is kind of what is happening here with Rehoboam. Rehoboam, of course, was Solomon's son. He decided to go up to Shechem so that all Israel could come and make him the king. Now, Jeroboam was a representative of the peoples in all the tribes except Judah. And he had earlier angered Solomon. And as a result of angering Solomon, he had fled to exile in the country of Egypt. So now that Solomon was dead, Rehoboam was about to take the throne. He led a delegation to Rehoboam to request that Rehoboam, as king, lighten the tax burden and the other conscription burdens that his father had placed upon the people. Now, Rehoboam did consult the elders who had once stood in the court of King Solomon. These were older men at this time, and some may have been extremely aged. But they were men of experience, and they gave their advice to Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, after hearing from Jeroboam, told the group Jeroboam represented to return in 3 days so he could take counsel. And Rehoboam took counsel with these elders, and then these elders had advised Rehoboam to consider lightening the tax burden, lightening the conscriptions of the people to make their lives a little easier, and to speak kindly to the people. And after speaking with these elders, Rehoboam decided that he would go and seek advice from those men who had grown up with Rehoboam. So these were the younger generation, the ones that were taking command, if you will, of the government. And Rehoboam was asking their advice in this circumstance too. What should I do with the request? Now, the king followed the counsel of the younger leaders, and he spoke harshly to the people. And in response to that, Jeroboam, who was the leader of the delegation, caused that group to split and become the kingdom of Israel, or the northern kingdom as we would know them. Now, Jeroboam was made king of that northern kingdom, and he made moves to strengthen his kingdom against Judah, and Judah was the only tribe that did not go to Jeroboam. So we find out, though, in history that sometime in the near future, the tribe of Benjamin leaves the northern kingdom and comes to join Judah and form what is called the southern kingdom. Now, Jeroboam did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He set up idols and pagan temples for worship throughout the northern kingdom. A man of God, it doesn't say who it is, it just says a man of God came to Bethel where Jeroboam was, and he pronounced judgment against the king. Now, Jeroboam didn't pay attention to him. He persisted in doing evil, ignoring the counsel that Ahijah, the prophet of the southern kingdom, had given him. And as a result, Jeroboam's son became sick. And the king's wife, the queen, if you will, went to inquire from Ahijah if he could pray to God to heal their son. And Ahijah told Jeroboam's wife that Jeroboam's house would come to an end, that the child would die, and that Jeroboam, when he died, his son Nadab might become king, but he will not last. Now, Rehoboam continued to reign in Judah, but Rehoboam also did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In response, God sent the Pharaoh from Egypt as an instrument of judgment against Judah. When Rehoboam died, his son Abijam became king. Now, that's a little bit of history. Let's move into these verses and see what we can learn from them. In verses 6 to 7, Rehoboam met with the people at Shechem. They encouraged him to lighten their load, as we've already seen. And the king then had to make a decision. He took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon. This is the older group of men who had the experience, and they knew that Solomon's policies had been extremely taxing, extremely difficult upon the people. And they saw an opportunity for the king's son, Rehoboam, to bring the people together and tell them, yes, he would lighten the tax burden upon them. Now, during Solomon's reign, there had been a lot of economic prosperity for the entire nation. These elders represented a lot of very successful men in that kingdom. And so that's why Rehoboam asked these men about advice. The men not only advised what to do, but they also advised that Rehoboam have a conciliatory attitude with the people. In other words, speak good words so that they will see that you are concerned about their load and lightening their load. Now, 2 centuries after Rehoboam, we have the prophet Isaiah, and he contrasted the attitudes of 2 kings or 2 officials in King Hezekiah's court. Hezekiah was a good man, a good king. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Shebna was one of these men, and he used his power for his own gain. But another man, Eliakim, was a servant of God, and he was more like a father to the people. Now, leaders, even today, leaders should not seek personal gain from their positions, but they should seek to use their position of influence to serve people and to glorify God. Jesus encouraged his own followers to practice servant leadership, just as he did by dying on the cross. Wise leaders know how to seek counsel before making important decisions. We make better decisions when we learn from the experience of others. Having experience, though, does not mean a person knows everything, but experience often is the better teacher. Now let's go to verses 8 to 11. The words, he abandoned the counsel, that is what Rehoboam did, abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him. Rehoboam was most likely just hoping the elders would go along with the strategy he had already decided upon. And that strategy had nothing to do with what the elders had advised. The king then took counsel with the young men, as scriptures tell us. These were men who had grown up with Rehoboam. They were about the same age as Rehoboam, and they had been in positions learning about being princes in the king's court, learning that Rehoboam would be king and how to serve him. And these young men represented a new team of advisors. They had a whole lot less experience than the ones who had advised Solomon and subsequently Rehoboam. But the king asked these younger leaders, what do you advise that we answer Jeroboam and those he represents? These young leaders heard the people's concerns personally. They didn't have to listen to the king tell them. But he did state what the people's statement was, and that was to lighten the yoke that Solomon your father had put on us. So the economic growth Solomon's reign had featured had come with a price. Solomon's many building projects, including the temple and his own palace, had put a strain on the people, many of whom made up part of Solomon's workforce. This is the conscripted group of people that we learned about in a couple of lessons ago. The young men who had grown up with Rehoboam replied with words that the king seemed to want to hear. And I think that would be the case. He already knew what he wanted to say to these people, and these guys were just reinforcing what he already thought. And I suspect they had already discussed this before they had their advisory council. The young leaders suggested that Rehoboam tell the people, my little finger's thicker than my daddy's thighs. That means I'm much more powerful than my daddy. King David's reign had featured a lot of military activity to bring peace to Israel by the time of David's death and Solomon's reign. He received the kingdom in a secure position. Its borders were calm, and Solomon continued to grow the kingdom in a peaceful manner, and that was primarily due to the wisdom that Solomon used in making treaties with the countries and the cities that surrounded Israel. And as we know and already understand, part of the signing or the completing of the treaty was Solomon would take a female for either a wife or a concubine as a seal to that particular treaty. Now, this passage has nothing to do with teaching us about brash, young, inexperienced men versus older, much more experienced men when it comes to giving advice. When Timothy served the church in Ephesus, he was a pretty young guy too. Paul told Timothy that he should live in such a way that no one would look down on Timothy because he was a young man. Paul recognized that Timothy had much to offer the church there in Ephesus. So God can use leaders with servant attitudes regardless of their age or their experience. Here's an application for us at Powder Springs FBC. We're looking for a pastor. He doesn't have to be an old man. He doesn't have to be a new graduate of seminary either. The thing that we really want to find out is what kind of attitude does this candidate have? Is he a servant of the Lord? If he's a servant of the Lord, then he will lead the people, the sheep here at Powder Springs, as a good shepherd. And That would be the type of preacher we should have. Verse 11 continues the words the young men had suggested Rehoboam share. And, they go back to Solomon laying a heavy yoke on the people. And now Rehoboam is saying, I'm going to add to that yoke. You thought it was heavy under Solomon, it's going to be even heavier unto me. And the young leaders also suggested Rehoboam tell the people, my father disciplined you with whips, but me, I'm going to discipline you with scorpions. What worse thing than a whip than to be stung by a scorpion? It's like having fire literally put into your veins. Let's move to verses 12 to 15. Jeroboam and all the people came together on the third day. So Jeroboam now knows what he's going to say. And these verses here tell us that Jeroboam, serving as the primary spokesman for the delegation of the people, they may have come expecting Rehoboam to lessen the burden that they had been under King Solomon, but that was not to be the case. The king answered the people very harshly, and the text here stresses that Rehoboam ignored the advice of these older, more experienced advisors. And these men knew what the country was facing now that Solomon was dead. They knew before Solomon had died how hard it had been on the people. But the people did love King Solomon for his wisdom and for all that he brought into the country. But they knew Rehoboam needed to lighten that yoke now that Solomon was gone. But Rehoboam rejected that wisdom from them. Here's another application. Leaders in our church, they should listen to the people that they lead. Good leaders know how to listen, and they know how to listen to the right people. Yeah, there's always going to be in a crowd some who want things that are not sensible. And it doesn't matter what their age is. They just have a wrong attitude about how things should be run in the church. And we need leaders who can listen carefully and understand who is making and giving the advice. Now, as Rehoboam was addressing the people, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men. And the word translated young men here in the Hebrew could also mean children. So these young men who had given their brash advice, their inexperienced knowledge, were like children giving advice to the king. And Rehoboam told the people, my father made your yoke heavy. I'm going to add to that yoke. The people would not have appreciated those words from Rehoboam. Rehoboam told them, my father disciplined you with whips. I'm going to discipline you with scorpions. Those present at that meeting that day saw that Rehoboam desired to exalt himself at their expense. And though they had done that with King Solomon, they were no longer willing to exalt a man as king at their expense. And this approach by Rehoboam was about to cost him dearly. The king did not listen to the people to lighten their load. He chose to listen to his young men rather than the more experienced elders. And it became a turn of affairs brought about by God that he might fulfill his word to Solomon. So all of this is at the hand of God. God is using evil people here to accomplish what he had told Solomon would happen. Now, these words do not suggest that God made Rehoboam speak harshly. That would be Rehoboam's decision himself. But God is using these circumstances to work his purposes. We must understand that God in this fallen world is very capable of taking bad things and making them work for good. Romans 8:28. He's also very capable of taking things that people say brashly and making them worse. And in this case with Rehoboam, that's what it is. Now, the Lord had seen Solomon's spiritual compromise, and he knew, God knew that disaster for Israel was coming. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king, so we know how old he was. He had seen the luxury of his father and how his father had reigned, and he was determined to make his own life even better than his dad's. So the Lord worked through Rehoboam's arrogance and selfishness to fulfill the prophecy that he had given, that God had given to Solomon. Arrogant counsel usually leads to self-serving decisions. That's today, folks. Application. Young men who advised Rehoboam were self-serving, as was the king's reply to the people. We have a word today that we might describe this group of young men as advisors to Rehoboam. They were sycophants. They were just telling Rehoboam what Rehoboam wanted to hear, and giving him the arrogance to go and do what he had already planned to do. Verses 16 to 19. When all Israel saw that the king had not listened to them, they responded, "What portion do we have with David?" In other words, David's not our king. We don't have anything to do with David. He's Judah. Yeah, he was king, and yeah, he got our country all settled. But what do we have to do with him now? Nothing. They stated their opinion straightforwardly. We have no inheritance in David, the son of Jesse. The words portion and inheritance imply having a real place in the Israelite community. And these people no longer felt like they had that place because of Rehoboam's harshness and statements. So the people's words, coupled with their declaration, "To your tents, O Israel," echoed the words of Sheba, a man who had attempted rebellion during David's reign. Discontentment had arisen during David's reign when many of the tribes felt that Judah received preferential treatment because it was David's tribe. After 40 years more under Solomon, that's 80 years total under a ruler from the tribe of Judah, these harsh words from Rehoboam, another person from the tribe of Judah, may have proved to be a tipping point for the other tribes to revolt. So Israel went to their tents, Scripture tells us. This doesn't mean that people still lived in their tents. They had had many years to settle into the land. They had been given homes that were lavishly furnished, cities that were well built. This is just a saying, to your tents, to your homes. Go home and take care of your home. And Jeroboam formed a new nation, and they called it Israel, and it's also referred to as the Northern Kingdom. This was a statement that they were making, that they were done. They were finished with the house of Judah and those kings who had come from them. Rehoboam reigned over the people of Judah. He reigned over the people who had had revolted, but they lived in the cities of Judah, and so Rehoboam reigned over them. God had said he would give Solomon's son, in this case Rehoboam, one tribe to rule for David's sake, and that's what he got. He got Judah. So God fulfilled his word, although later we read that Benjamin joined Judah for a time. Rehoboam's territory was much smaller than what his father and his grandfather had ruled. Rehoboam sent the taskmaster who had once worked all of these people under Solomon's reign, and when the people saw him coming, they decided to stone him to death. And it was an angry reaction to what Rehoboam had already said, and they were once again saying, we will have nothing to do with Judah. King Rehoboam, knowing this, got into his chariot and fled from Shechem, where he was, to Jerusalem. And that was about 30 miles away. And they lay on a route that could be taken to get there quickly. The writer of Kings stated the sad conclusion here. Israel has been in rebellion to the house, or against the house of David, to this day. Whatever time the author wrote the Kings, the accounts of the Kings, Israel was still a divided nation. The people had witnessed unity under King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. However, with Rehoboam came the split. From 930 BC, the two kingdoms would exist as separate nations, northern and southern kingdom. Ultimately, in 722 BC, the northern kingdom was assimilated by the Assyrian Empire. Yes, they defeated them army-wise, carried off some people back to Damascus, where Assyria was headquartered, but the policy of the Assyrian people was to move into the territory they had conquered, intermarry, and this is what exactly happened in the northern kingdom. Judah, as we know, fell to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians in 586 BC. Jeroboam, the northern kingdom's first king, just as all of the following kings of the northern kingdom, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. There was not one king in the northern kingdom who was a godly man and tried to follow God. Jeroboam led a lot of people astray with idol worship. Solomon had left idol altars, idol temples all over the land, and Jeroboam just picked them up and used them. Self-serving decisions cause painful divisions. Let us not, as a church, get into this issue of self-serving decisions. May we be mindful and listening for God's leadership here as we seek God's choice to be the under shepherd for our church. The challenge for believers today is to examine the motives in decisions that are being made. failure to listen to wise counsel, regardless of age, even to some degree, regardless of experience. Education can be of help here. A well-trained seminarian, a well-trained biblical scholar. These are people who may not have the experience yet, but they have good training. But failure to listen to wise counsel often contributes to conflict, and that usually results in division. It's my prayer that this lesson today has helped us understand that even today, churches go through situations just like we saw here with Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Let's pray, and we'll end our lesson. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you in your word that you show us the results of when people ask governors to be mindful of their needs, of what happens when governors of the people do not accept wise counsel of people who advise them. Father, it is apparent in our own society today that we have people who are not receiving wise counsel. And Father, I just pray that you would help each of us as we consider what we need to do as individual voters and as groups of people to make that change. Father, I pray that you will help us this coming week to see in our own lives, in our own church, what we can do to effect the selection of our new pastor that's coming in. We recognize, God, you have chosen that man already. It is up to us to discern who that is through the process that we are following. Now, Father, bless us this week as we live our life for you each and every day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.